Good morning. This hearing will come to order. And first of all, I want to welcome everyone to the first Senate budget hearing in 2014 and thank my ranking member Sessions and all of our colleagues who are joining us here today. And I want to thank our witnesses as well. Dr. Mark Zandi is the chief economist for Moody's Analytics, will be here in just a few minutes. He is on a train, is my understanding. Robert Greenstein, president of the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and David Rosenberg, who's the chief economist and strategist of Gluskin, Sheff and Associates. Right now, as many of you know, the Congressional Budget Office is sharing its baseline numbers and economic outlook for the next decade. We will have a hearing with CBO Director Elmendorf on that outlook next week. But for our hearing today, I want to take some time to look back at where we've been and how I'd like to see this committee and Congress move forward in the years ahead. There's no question Congress has spent far too much time over the past few years lurching from budget crisis to budget crisis, from one artificial deadline to the next, and from one partisan battle to another. That has had a real impact on our economy and families across the country. Last March, I was out in Lakewood, Washington, where I met a man. His name is Matthew Hines. He and his wife both work at Joint Base Lewis McChord. And when the across-the-board spending cuts, known as sequestration, hit, both he and his wife were furloughed. Together, they stood to lose about 40% of their income. Because of irresponsible budget cuts in D.C., Matthew worried his family would miss their mortgage payments. He was working very hard, serving his country, doing the right thing, but because Congress was mired in partisanship and gridlock, his family was forced to pay the price, and I think that's just wrong. We were sent here by our constituents to solve problems, not create them, to work together, not tear each other apart. So I'm hopeful that we here in this committee and all of us in Congress can build on the foundation of the bipartisan budget deal we brokered last December and on the progress that we have seen since then. Now is the time to move away from governing by crisis and move forward by investing in priorities that help families and communities all across the country. Now, the senseless across-the-board cuts didn't just hit defense workers like the Hines family. They also took a toll on education and Head Start programs. In years past, the Denise Louis Education Center that's in Washington State had a waiting list for preschoolers. But last year, because of those cuts, the school had to start dropping kids from their program. Across the country, more than 50,000 young learners weren't able to attend Head Start. Severe cuts slashed other important investments in medical research, in infrastructure, and in military readiness. And it didn't end there. At a time when families across the country have been reeling from the greatest economic downturn since the Great Depression, brinksmanship in Congress infused uncertainty into the economy. Last September, the Budget Committee had a hearing on the detrimental impact of political uncertainty on jobs and the economy. In fact, one of our witnesses today, Mark Zandi, was at that hearing, and he told us that since 2008, political uncertainty reduced real GDP by nearly $150 billion and increased unemployment by 0.7 percentage points. I'm glad Dr. Zandi will be here again to share his outlook on the economy today, because since then, Congress has made some significant progress. Late last year, after the government shutdown and debt limit scare, Republicans dropped their demands and joined with Democrats to reopen the government, prevent a catastrophic default by raising the debt limit without preconditions, and finally allow the budget conference that many of us here on the Budget Committee spent 7 months fighting to start. When Chairman Ryan and I sat down together in the budget conference, we faced a lot of skepticism that we would be able to get anything done. Every bipartisan budget group that had met over the past few years had ended in the same way, with gridlock and inaction. And coming so soon after the partisanship and bitterness surrounding the government shutdown, many people thought there was just no way Democrats and Republicans could work together for the good of the country. We came into our budget conference knowing we weren't going to agree on everything. We came in with very different budgets, very different ideologies, and very different values and priorities. But we also came ready to listen to each other, put partisanship aside, find some common ground, and make some compromises. Many of us wanted an agreement, not a fight. We aimed for what was attainable, and we were able to reach a deal that showed the American people that the dysfunction of the past few years was a choice made by a minority, not an inevitable fact of our divided government. That two-year deal, the Bipartisan Budget Act, prevented a government shutdown and set bipartisan spending levels through the end of 2015. It replaced almost two-thirds of this year's across-the-board cuts to domestic investments, and it prevented another round of defense cuts that were scheduled to go into effect earlier this year. The bipartisan budget deal was a step in the right direction, but it was only a step. It wasn't exactly the deal that Democrats would have done on our own, and I know it's not what Republicans would have done on their own. But the agreement moved us away from the dysfunction that has defined Congress in the past few years. It proved that bipartisan work was possible, and now we all have a responsibility to keep that work going. Congress has now built on that bipartisan success. After laying the groundwork in the budget deal, Chairwoman Mikulski worked with House appropriators, and together they were able to make critical investments in our country. The bipartisan omnibus bill we passed last month expanded access to preschool. More 2-, 3-, and 4-year-olds will get the tools they need to start kindergarten on strong footing. For our national defense, the bill eliminated the threat of civilian furloughs in 2014. That means more hardworking Americans won't have to worry if their next paycheck will be enough to make ends meet. And it made critical investments in transportation projects that put more people back to work and help make our roadways and transit systems safer and less congested. In addition to that important legislation, just last week, under the leadership of Chairwoman Debbie Stabenow, our colleague here on this committee, an agreement was reached on a bipartisan farm bill. So we have bipartisan momentum right now. We should build on that by investing in broad-based economic growth and expanding opportunities for families, small business owners, and communities across the country. That doesn't mean we lose sight of or ignore our long-term fiscal challenges. Of course not. Since 2009, the deficit has been cut in half. We need to build on that work fairly and responsibly. I know Democrats are at the table ready to do that, and I'm hopeful this will be a year that Republicans are ready to join us and make some compromises. But we also need to make sure we don't let the reality of our long-term fiscal challenges prevent us from addressing the reality of our short-term economic challenges. Families are struggling today. Workers are fighting to get back on the job or barely keeping their heads above the water with the jobs they do have. Our country isn't making the investments that we need to in education, in research, in innovation, to compete and win in the 21st century global economy. Our infrastructure is crumbling, and we are not doing what we need to do to leave a stronger country for our children than the one we got from our parents. So we need to get to work. For starters, I believe we should increase the minimum wage. One of our witnesses here today, Robert Greenstein, testified last week before the House Budget Committee. I'll echo a point that Mr. Greenstein made there. Raising the minimum wage would boost the upward economic mobility of low-wage workers. A pay increase to $10.10 would help families make ends meet and would expand opportunities for them to get ahead. Last week in the State of the Union address, President Obama stressed that early childhood education is one of the smartest investments we can make, and I couldn't agree more. As a former preschool teacher, I know the difference it can make in a child's life. Preschool offers young learners the building blocks they need to go to kindergarten ready to tackle a curriculum. The path to greater opportunity in this country starts with a quality education, so I'll be working hard to make sure more students have access to preschool, to world-class grade schools, and to higher education. Those are just a few examples of the work we should be doing. But divided government requires that Republicans and Democrats work together. That's the only way we'll enact policies that solve problems and help families and businesses by creating broad-based economic growth and increased opportunity. Just when we have the opportunity to make progress on investing in the future, I worry that some members of Congress are falling back into their old habits and planning to manufacture a crisis over the debt limit. And just like last time, they can't seem to agree on which ridiculous demand to make in exchange for ensuring the United States pays its bills. Secretary Lew had an important message for these members yesterday. Time is running out. And the longer Republicans take to dream up empty debt limit demands, the more economic uncertainty and harm they'll cause for workers and families and businesses. So I hope those Republicans who are engaging in brinkmanship will listen to Secretary Lew and to our discussion today. And I hope they'll do right away what they've ultimately done twice in 1 year, give up their ransom demands and raise the debt ceiling without strings attached, and work with Democrats on the real challenges that we face. I recently got an update from the Hines family I talked about a few minutes ago, and it reminded me of what's at stake here. Matthew said he and his wife survived last year's furloughs. He just hopes they never have to go through that again. Thankfully, because of our bipartisan budget deal, his family and his coworkers won't have to worry about layoffs and furloughs. When Congress gets serious about putting families and communities first, we can solve problems. We can help people like the Hines family, and we can move the country forward. I invite all of our colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, to join us this year in building on the bipartisan work we've done and investing in our national priorities. Together, we can move forward beyond the constant crises of recent years to make sure businesses can grow and communities can thrive. Together, we can expand opportunity so all Americans get the chance they need to succeed. And with that, before we hear from our witnesses, I will turn to my ranking member, Senator Sessions, for his opening remarks.